So let's talk about money. Let's talk about funding your film, because you can't make a movie for free. Well, you could. You just got to pay for rent and kind of like life and all of that, which requires a bit of money. So you'd need money to complete your film one way or another. And there's kind of 6 different types of funding. So I'm going to list those. And then one of the next videos, I'm going to sit down with my creative partner, Michael Medalmonte. We're going to talk about different types of funding and kind of get more into the weeds of all of that. But right now, let's just do some high-level overview of the different types of funding, and then we can talk about it a bit further in some future videos. So quickly, here are the 6 different types of funding that I'm going to break down. The first one is private investor. Number 2 is broadcasters. Number 3 is grants. Number 4 is branded or sponsored content. Number 5 is crowdfunding, and number 6 is personally funded. So the first type of funding we're going to speak about is private funding. And me and Michael have both actually funded a couple of our films this way with a private investor. There's some pluses and minuses to doing it this way. My film Rescate was privately funded. Our film Transcend was also privately funded. The great thing about a private funding is you're only really talking to one person outside of your core creative team who has influence on the film. What's nice about this is usually the person investing into the film is passionate about the subject. Now, some of the downsides is they're likely going to be expecting a ROI, a return on investment. And in one of my future videos, I'm going to talk about how to get money back with your films in documentary or how to break even. Now, private investing often can be a smaller amount because it's not necessarily a corporation or a big company or a broadcaster funding it. It's usually an individual who's doing it because they're passionate about your subject or they're passionate about you creating the film that you believe in. So they're smaller amounts, but the nice thing with that is there's less red tape to go through. You just have to get the idea approved with them, sign a contract, make sure you sign a contract, and then proceed with the film. And they may not want to see any edits at all. They may just want their name on the film. But what's nice is you're usually just dealing with one person. But one bad thing about private investing is if you know the person and you don't complete the film is you run the risk of ruining a friendship. When you're doing a privately funded film, you have to ask yourself, what is this relationship worth? Because you can ruin a relationship. It's like going into business with someone. You have the opportunity to squander their money, and it can create a lot of dissension between you and that person. So consider who you're having the funding come from. If it's a family member, this could put a lot of strain on that relationship. Just know when you're getting private funding that you're going to be able to complete the film, because it's more difficult to see that person face to face than it is to see maybe a broadcaster who you didn't use the money properly. But if you're going to be taking anyone's money, you should be trying to complete the project. But with private investing, you usually know the person personally. So be careful with that. Tread carefully, tread with caution. The number 2 way of getting funding for your documentaries, and this is the way we've most often got our money, is through a broadcaster. This is a traditional way documentaries have been funded. And by a broadcaster, I mean anything from literally like a broadcaster like here in Canada, we have CBC, and they've funded a bunch of our documentaries. Yes TV is a TV channel who just funded No Country is an Island. Or you can get funded by people like Netflix or Amazon Prime. Now, those streaming platforms are sometimes more difficult to get all of the money up front for your projects. What they like to do most often is buy your project once it's completed. So they wait for you to get all the funding yourself. Then they'll either sometimes help you with the last bit of funding, or they'll give you a purchase price for your film. Now, broadcasters are great for a couple reasons. One, you get a ton of money, usually. You get a lot of money up front. The broadcasters have a big pool of money from their budget, and they will fund your film that way. Now, the bad things are there's a lot of hoops to have to jump through. There's usually a whole team of people who will have to approve your film. You need to be ready to deliver a project up to spec, as we call it, where you're going to need to have subtitles on the film. You're going to need to have descriptive video on the film. You're going to need to understand time coding. You're going to need to take your final film to a professional finishing house. Something like The Matrix is a company here in Canada that helps people package their films for delivery for broadcast. You're going to need to hire a company like them to help deliver your project in the end. Or if you're working with professional editors, they may know some of the requirements from the broadcaster, but you need to also add 5.1 surround sound. There's usually a lot of rules and restrictions, not necessarily restrictions, but actually checklists that you need to do at the end of delivering your film. Another good thing though about broadcasters is, at least here in Canada, is if you have your film going to broadcast, it opens up what we call tax credits. And tax credits are literally money the government will give you back for completing a film with Canadian crew if you hire Canadian people. Now, you should research this in your country. I can't provide all the information for every country on earth, but sometimes there's tax credits that your government will award you if you're hiring people from your country to complete a piece of film or a short film or another form of art. So what's great is in Canada is we get a percentage of our budget back. Literally, we get a check from the government organizations like OMDC, Ontario Media Development Corporation, or Telefilm, Ontario Creates. These different organizations will cut you a check for funding. So this is what's great about broadcasting, is they open up that door. Another nice thing about broadcasting is you get your day rate as a filmmaker. And what I mean is you get paid to work on your own project. Because in the budget, you're going to have to write a director's rate. You're going to have to write an editor's rate. All these different rates you get to write into the budget. And now there are restrictions about them. You want to have a producer who understands how much money for them. Sometimes if you give too much money to the director, it could cancel you on tax credits. For me, I always hire a tax credit consultant who can help me determine all the rules ahead of time and afterwards, so that we're actually nailing all the checklists, because there's so much paperwork when it comes to tax credits. I've been working on the No Country is an Island tax credits for like a year now. But as I said, you get your day rate. So what's nice is you get paid to work on your own film. The third way to fund your film is government grants. So there are some governments in some countries, like Canada, who will give you money to create Canadian content, to pursue certain ideas about the Canadian landscape. If you make a film about Canada, or if you're filming up north and areas in Canada that don't have many films being made, you can get government grants. Now, I personally have never funded one of my films through grants, but this is an opportunity. You should always be looking at them, universities or other organizations. I even know my bank here in Canada, the RBC, Royal Bank of Canada, was giving grants for people who are making movies about water-related issues around the world. So keep your eyes out for grants. You can literally do a Google search on film grants. There's some great ones. We'll provide a list of grants from around the world for different filmmakers. Now, you sometimes need to hire a grant writer to help you write all the information in about the grant. There is lots of little paperwork that needs to be done for these things, so they are time-consuming, but it's also money to make the films that you want to make. The fourth way to get your film funded is branded content or sponsored content. You can take your idea to different brands and different companies, and if you give them a pitch about why your story relates to their subject, relates to their product, you can have the film completed. So I made a documentary about a photographer named David Yarrow, and this was a photographer who he was trying to create a one-of-a-kind photo up close with a lion in the wild, and he uses Nikon cameras, so it was the perfect film to create with Nikon. And so we actually had Nikon sponsor this. They actually approached me, but it was a collaboration because they needed this documentary done about David Yarrow. So working with brands is another way to get your documentaries funded. So for me, I'll actually just approach brands. I reached out to a lens company before COVID-19 and was like, hey, do you want to do a film? They were super interested in it. Fortunately, because of COVID-19, we haven't been able to actually work on that film just yet. But there is opportunities for you as a filmmaker to reach out to brands because they have money, they have marketing budgets. So you might as well take the risk and reach out to them with an idea. And this is where we talked about teasers, where if you have a teaser cut about your film, it'll definitely help them. Now, a couple tips though about branded content. Always make sure you have a director's cut, because sometimes the brand will really want the documentary in the end to be focused on their product. But sometimes in your director's cut, you can kind of pull back a bit on some of the branding per se so that it feels a bit more like a film. Always have a director's cut either in your contract or work with an editor to have your own director's cut, because the client version will probably feel different than the film you want to create. And that's where a lot of documentaries are going now, having corporate sponsors involved. So it's a great way to get your film funded. Just know you want to have a director's cut so you have your creative piece that you don't feel isn't tainted with a brand or with all this advertising in the midst of a documentary film. Now, the number 5 way to fund your film is crowdfunding. And crowdfunding has some really great things about it, because right away, if you get your film funded on something like Indiegogo or Kickstarter, then you have a captive audience. You have a bunch of people who've already invested in your film and they want to A, see it made, and B, they're going to watch it. So you have an audience. You know, when you complete that film, you have people who are almost guaranteed to watch the film. Now, crowdfunding is actually very time consuming because not only do you have to write emails to a lot of your donors who are part of that, but you also sometimes have to create incentives. You have to add people into the credits, or you have to send them DVDs if people actually still watch those, or movie posters, or whatever the incentives are you have for the people who are investing into your film. You need to be on top of that, because if you're not communicating with the people who've invested into your project, A, it's really upsetting for them, and B, you're going to have an angry audience at the end of it that's going to exhaust you when you're trying to work creatively on the project. So I think if you're going to do crowdfunding, bring in a producer, bring in an extra person who can deal with that so you can focus creatively on the project. Indiegogo, what's great with them is you don't have to hit your full funding for you to keep the money. If you miss your goal, you still get to keep the money. Where Kickstarter, if you have a goal, let's say of 10,000 and you hit 9,000, you don't get to keep any of the money. All the money goes back to everyone. So when you're starting a goal on Kickstarter, know that you may not want it to be as high, or if you put it high, you need to make sure you complete it. You need to make sure you go all the way with it. And last but not least is personally funded. This is when it's a passion project, when you put your own money into the film. Michael, my co-director, he put all his own money into His Name is Ray, and it's paying off already. The connections he's making behind the scenes are incredible. We haven't released the film yet, but when you personally fund a film, when you personally invest into it, you usually want to complete that film. And what's great about personal funded films is there's no one to tell you what to do. You can go full bore on the creativity. You can fully do what you want and what you desire. Now, it really hurts your pocketbook. And it's difficult to necessarily travel when it's your own passion project because you might not have the money. And this is where kind of the combination between personal investment and having a private investor can work out, because they can help complete the last bit of funding that you may need. And then you don't have to worry about broadcasters or anyone being on top of you. Now, the downside of this is it usually means you're on a tight budget, because I don't know about you, but I don't have millions of dollars. I wish I did, to spend on creating my own films. So personal investing, I think, is a great way to kick off your film. I also think it's a great way to get your trailer done, your teaser done. It's a great way where no one is telling you what to do, because if you can shoot the teaser without any funding, you're going to create it to be exactly the way you want your future film to be like. And this is a good thing to do when you're pitching your teaser to broadcasters, to funders, to crowdfunding. You want it to represent your final film as much as possible. So I like to personally fund my own teasers. I'll hire my own crew, or I'll spend my money on whatever I need to create that teaser, because then it's going to most look like my final film. So I know that was a lot that I just covered. Leave some comments, guys. Reach out to us if you guys want to hear more about different types of funding. I can create some more videos about that. But check out the next videos, because me and Michael are going to be talking about this a bit more in depth together.